Detective Locke tells Susan that the book, Atticus Takes the Case, has nothing in common with the real-life murder of Frank Parris. What do you think? Frank Parris was a broke executive who was in a hotel and got bludgeoned with a hammer, while Melissa James was a movie star who got strangled with a telephone cord in her own house. But with each episode, we're finding parallels between the book and the real-life case. Frank and his sister share an inheritance. He wants some of the money from that. In the book Atticus Takes the Case, Algernon Marsh doesn't receive any of the inheritance that his sister Samantha Collins gets. Will Algernon act like Frank and want that inheritance money? Start looking for these mirror images. See if you can solve what the book and Frank Parris's murder have in common. Let's solve Moonflower Murders, Episode 3. Susan investigates more about the Frank Parris murder. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings on the hunt to learn where is missing daughter Cecily? Why did the police arrest Stefan for Frank Parris's murder? Who killed Frank Parris? How did Alan Conway solve it? Why did Stefan confess? Who killed the actress Melissa James? Spoilers for the first 3 episodes of Moonflower Murders. We're at the halfway point. If you're not at that point, please stop watching this video, turn on your local news and see what's happening in your community, and then come back and watch. Use the timestamps below to jump to the topic or suspect that you want to hear, and skip past things you don't want to hear. Let me reiterate, I've read this book, Moonflower Murders, and while there are already some big changes in the TV adaptation from the book, I'm relatively confident that the solutions to the mysteries will be the same on the show as they were in the book. So I don't really feel comfortable speculating about the crimes on this podcast. Now, when we did our podcast on the first series, Magpie Murders, I had our host Catfish jump in and speculate on the killer. It was great. He had some incredible theories, and the plan was for Catfish to join us on this podcast on Moonflower Murders. But he had a health emergency. He was actually in the hospital when the show started. We couldn't record. He's out now, but he's not in a place to catch up and give us some great wild theories. So if you could, please help me out. If you have a theory about any of the disappearances, murders, confessions, cover-ups, anything, please, if you're watching on YouTube, go down in the comments, leave your thoughts. If you're listening on audio podcast, please send your theories to us on social media at PHQ. That's the word double, the single letter P for podcast, HQ for headquarters, at PHQ on Twitter, Instagram, Threads, Facebook.com/PHQ, hello at PPmedia.com. Let's hear them. At the end of this podcast, I'm going to read some incredible feedback I got on episode 2. You guys are great about catching details. And after I read your feedback, I'll go ahead and give a small, slightest, maybe not a hint at all. Because by this point when I was reading the book, I had solved the Melissa James murder, the murder that takes place in the novel Atticus Takes the Case. So it'll be a slight hint. You don't have to listen if you don't want it. But if you're wondering, gosh, yeah, who did kill Melissa James? I'll give you the slightest, maybe not a hint at all, at the very end of this podcast. Know that Moonflower Murders is being released first in the United States on PBS, Public Broadcasting, and it's a staggered release schedule for the rest of the world. If you're here in the United States, as soon as Moonflower Murders ends, there's going to be another murder mystery coming on that you may enjoy, another kind of cozy, fun murder mystery. It's already been released in England and the UK. It's called the Marlowe Murder Club. I know many book clubs have read Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club. I personally think this book and this book series by Robert Thorogood is a better version of The Thursday Murder Club. And so once again, once this finishes on PBS in the United States, we're going to get the first season of the Marlowe Murder Club. It's only 4 episodes. I read the book. I won't do a Let's Solve video series on it. But again, if you like this type of thing, check out the Marlowe Murder Club on PBS. I've mentioned this before, but we're doing a subscriber drive here at the end of 2024. Anytime you listen to this video, please, if you enjoy it, subscribe. YouTube really will not share the video with others unless you get subscribers. So please, 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 it doesn't cost you anything. Click subscribe if you like this type of content. Before we run down the suspects, let's see what episode 3 taught us about the real-life missing person, Cecily Treherne. Cecily is still missing. It's been over a week. What do you think? Will we see Cecily again? Now we know Cecily was pregnant when she got married. Apparently that weekend she was also a bundle of emotions, excitement, nervousness, she couldn't sleep. She was a perfectionist and freaking out. She freaked out over a horoscope. The flowers didn't show up on time for the wedding. Then there's the classic something old, something borrowed. She was going to take a fountain pen from her father, but it went missing. Cecily ended up borrowing something from her sister Lisa. What did she borrow? Where is Cecily? Now let's look at the murder victim from that weekend 8 years ago, Frank Parris. Frank Parris had left the UK. He'd moved to Australia to work at an agency called Day's End. And here's another one of those ties to the novel. Day's End is the name of the stock/company that Algernon had Melissa James invest in. Of course, that stock lost Melissa James a lot of money. We know Frank lost a lot of money at Day's End. What was author Alan Conway trying to get across by naming this Day's End? Now, he's lost all his money, so he flies back to England. He stays there at the hotel. He goes to see a lawyer, Sajid Khan, because he and his sister had inherited this house. Frank was hashtag ice cold with his sister. He says, "Boy, you've lived here this whole time, and I've never charged you rent." Ouch. He wants his half of the cash of this house. When Frank was doing well with his money, he let his sister and her husband live there in peace. But now that Frank's company has gone out of business, he wants half the house. He was forcing them to sell, and he would have, but he died. With the sister Joanna and her husband, we finally have people with a definite motive to kill Frank Parris. Now let's look at the suspects. Susan is not really a suspect. We know that. She is having a tough time. When she visits her sister, she can kind of be honest for once. She says, the hotel in Greece, it's not her cup of tea. She even pitches later to Andreas, hey, sell the hotel. On top of that, this missing Cecily is getting her nervous. She's smoking again. She's afraid of the answer, where is Cecily? She's trying to see Stefan in prison. Why did he confess? And she's going to go check in with author Alan Conway's old partner, James Taylor. So she is going forward, but guess what? She's also got an interview for a job. She may not be going back to Greece or going back to Andreas. Again, for a second episode in a row, Andreas is still in Crete. We've got Lawrence and his wife Pauline Treherne, the hotel owners. Pauline is staying positive. She believes Cecily will be found. Really, all they do this episode is maybe give us a bit more information about the wedding 8 years ago, that weekend. Again, we mentioned that the expensive fountain pen went missing. Pauline is very quick to say Stefan stole the pen. Cecily's sister, Lisa. Lisa is working out under Liam's supervision, and she is very interested in what Liam may have said to Susan. Why is that? When Liam confronts her and says, "Do you think Cecily's still alive?" Lisa doesn't answer. Liam implies that Lisa and her parents may have been paying Stefan something not quite legal. And he also mentioned something that may be going on between Lisa and Stefan, the man who confessed to killing Frank Parris. Cecily's husband, Aiden. Aiden goes along with Detective Locke and he records the on-camera message begging for Cecily or anybody who knows where Cecily is to come forward. Aiden was there when this pen went missing. He really doesn't think much of it. According to him, Stefan came in with wedding presents. Stefan left. He suddenly noticed, hey, the pen is missing. Aiden told his daughter Roxana that her mother will be coming back, but you can see it on his face. He is starting to lose faith. He says he feels powerless after 8 days, and he's even freaking out about Susan getting £10,000 to just read a book. We just have a brief shot of hotel night manager Derek watching Aiden's announcement on TV. But we do have this interesting question from Susan. Alan Conway turned Derek, who seems like a nice guy, into a peeping Tom, pathetic character Eric in the novel. Why would Alan Conway do that? Derek's mother, Gwyneth, has a lot of emotion to Aiden's message, and she has faith that Cecily will return. Spa manager Liam Corby. He almost comes across as a more brutal version of Aiden. They're both white guys with blonde hair, but Liam has the stubble and he's kind of a jerk. I wonder if one will be mistaken for the other. Liam is an ugly customer. He implies he could blackmail Lisa. But of course, Lisa apparently knows a dark secret about him, which suggests, hey buddy, this is the only place you'll ever be able to work if this secret comes out. Now, just like Aiden had an interesting tattoo we looked at in the last episode, Liam has an odd tattoo in this episode on his arm. The new characters this week are the Websters, who are like a Funhouse mirror version of the novels The Collins. They live in Heath House, which is the inheritance which went with her and her brother Frank. She, at times, is kind of mean and bossy, like her brother Frank. In fact, she tells her husband, hey, stay out of this discussion with my brother. And she is not a fan of her brother. She tells Frank that he disgusts her and that his London life was disgusting before he moved to Australia. Frank gives as good as he gets because he calls Joanna a cow. Joanna, as it turns out, is not a fan of Susan. She doesn't want to see her again. Joanna's husband, Martin, is an odd duck. When watching Aiden's plea, he argues that Cecily won't be found alive. She'll be found dead, 6 feet underground in the middle of the woods with a rope around her neck. Or at least that's his guess. Ooh, pretty specific guess. Martin reminds his wife that, hey, it was real fortunate we didn't have to move because your brother died. And he was quick to say there was a lot of blood in Frank's death. Now, you would assume that from anybody bludgeoned with a hammer, but how does he know that? Martin also took a photo of the siblings, the last photo of Frank Parris alive. Detective Locke is sick of Susan interfering. He's got a huge crew marching through the woods looking for Cecily. He's read that Alan Conway book. He thinks it's rubbish. It has nothing to do with Frank Parris's murder. He doesn't want Susan to see Stefan, who he claims are part of Romania gangs. In fact, he threatened Susan with arrest. Lawyer Sajid Khan. Khan was in Magpie Murders before. He's Alan Conway's lawyer. And it turns out he worked on this inheritance of Frank Parris and his sister as well. Sajid Khan has read Atticus Boone Takes the Case twice. And he's recently seen Susan's sister, Katie. Now, Katie, remember, if you haven't seen Magpie Murders, Katie was a teacher at a school where Alan Conway and Andreas were other teachers. Since leaving teaching, she now works at this garden center. She claims she was seeing lawyer Sajid Khan about firing a person there, but that seems to be not true. Her son, Jack, dropped out of university for a year, and now, instead of going to university, he's working at the garden center. Jack is Susan's nephew. Something's going on there with them. What do you think? Okay, now let's dive into Atticus Boone Takes the Case. Once again, we're going to look at the victim, actress Melissa James. In the first episode, the Gardners were shocked that Melissa showed up at the hotel unannounced. But at the same time, she apparently had an office in the hotel, and she wrote a love letter to someone who would not be her husband, John. Now, I think we should all take a pause here and note that we have no proof that Melissa wrote this letter. Could this letter be a plant from the Gardners to get Boone to look in a different direction? The night she died, Melissa apparently fired her housekeeper Phyllis and her son Eric. She even threatened Eric with arrest. Now let's look at the suspects in the novel. We're going to begin with our lead detective, Atticus Pound. Atticus, not a fan of murder. He says murder is a pattern. He demands that Susan approach detective work in an orderly manner, one step at a time. Atticus has a great secretary, Madelaine Cain. Now, she was working at a biscuit company before she started this, so maybe that's why she freaks out when she hears about blood, and she does apologize for feigning. Madelaine can read people pretty well. She doesn't trust Lance Gardner an inch. She can call people out. She can lie to get to the truth about Oscar Berlin. Madelaine Cain seems like a great assistant, but remember, Magpie Murders was a later book in the series, and she doesn't appear in that. What ends up happening to Madelaine Cain? Film producer Oscar Berlin loves to lie. He says, boy, I never saw Melissa after she turned down the film here at the hotel. But he was lying. He went to her house, Clarence Keep, at 6:05. That's about 23 minutes before she'll call Dr. Collins. Outside the house, Oscar says he heard Melissa say, I want you out of my house. I've had it. The hotel is crooked. Oh, just go. We later find out that this is probably Melissa talking to her housekeeper and the son Eric. Now, Oscar, once again, he worked on this film for 3 years. Then weeks before starting production, Melissa James quit. She would have been playing the part of Eleanor of Aquitaine, mother to King Richard. Boy, this movie sounds a lot like A Lion in Winter, right? We have hotel manager Lance Gardner and his wife Maureen. They say they started running the Moonflower Hotel when Melissa bought it. Lance gets very offended when Madelaine claims they've been running the hotel to ruin. But Maureen admits she was very threatened when Melissa said she was going to do an audit of the hotel. There's also the question, why didn't the Gardners give this love letter, if it's a real love letter, to Detective Chubb? Melissa James' financial advisor, Algernon Marsh. Algernon, we know, did see Melissa the day she died. He had advised Melissa to invest £55,000 in this Day's End, which is a company that was purporting to build villas in the south of France, but may not have built anything. Algernon says he worked with Melissa a long time, and he claims, not so subtly, that he and Melissa had a very close relationship. Is this implying that Algernon and Melissa had an affair? Did Aiden and Lisa have an affair? We've got the workers, fired workers at Melissa James' mansion. Eric has been so nervous about his pervy secret. Eric is very worried about what's going to happen to him if he's fired, if he doesn't have a job anymore, if he can't live there at the house. Of course, he was creepy. He had a peephole into Melissa's bedroom. Ugh. Eric's mother, Phyllis, has had enough of this son. She's going to her sister's, to hell with him. In fact, she throws her son under the bus, saying, "I never wanted you from the day you were born." Woo. She claims his father died in the Great War. Ugh. Hurtful, hurtful mother. Now, Phyllis once again somehow knows that the Gardners were stealing money from the hotel from Melissa. Now it's time for your feedback. Jonathan wrote, "Why did Atticus Poon tell Susan, when Susan's daydreaming of Atticus Poon, why did he tell her that it might have been better if she hadn't come? Is Susan in danger again? This episode left me with so many questions. If the past and the present are inseparable, I wonder what the connection is between the murders of Frank Parris and Melissa James." Ooh, Jonathan, that is the question. These are the questions. Love it. Bob wrote, "Melissa James has to have been hurt in Stage Fright, which was a film Hitchcock made on vacation in England." Love it, Bob. The best detecting I've heard yet. Bob continues, "Cecily's mother is the ripest suspect for her disappearance." Ooh, that makes you think. Is all I'll say. To that note. Susan wrote, "In the Melissa James crime scene, the victim has 2 marks around the throat. Did the first attempt to kill Melissa James fail and a second strangulation was attempted? Detective Chubb said that the telephone downstairs had tissues by it, and it was tissues from Melissa James, and that telephone was working? The telephone in Melissa's room had been ripped out of the wall. Was the body repositioned from downstairs to upstairs in her bedroom?" Wonderful questions, everybody. I don't read all the feedback because you guys give wonderful, detailed, long answers. But everybody, if you get a chance, go to YouTube, go to our social media, and read the responses. They're incredible. Gen X Mind 67 wrote on the theory of, hey, Frank Parris was in the wrong hotel room. Maybe somebody killed him by accident. Gen X Mind thought possibly, but not feeling that theory at the moment. Perhaps the next episode will give us more clarity. I would love to see Frank Parris's old room and why it's now being used only for storage. No, not suspicious at all, ... Love it. Rick wrote, "When Miss Cain, Poon's assistant, got lightheaded and needed assistance when she was about to faint, was I the only one who initially thought she faked it so it would give Poon a chance to check out the room while the detective was distracted?" Let's watch that scene again, Rick. Very smart. Pika wrote, "I think Stefan knew something, and that's why he was framed. The real murderer wanted him locked up, and they could have framed anyone." Why Stefan, though? Good question. Great question. Every question's great. Our last bit of feedback is from Sanny D, who wrote, "Atticus Poon in the ride to the hotel talking about computers? ? That's off to me." Ooh, I love that thought. Atticus Poon is the central character in this book series that Alan Conway wrote. Atticus Poon takes the case, but we've got to look at every person in it, every suspect, because there are clues everywhere. I love it. We're at the halfway point. Who do you think did it? Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. I solved the Melissa James murder by this point in the story. And I mentioned that I'm going to give you the hint, and this may not be much of a hint, but in the Melissa James murder solution, this is Agatha Christie to a T, is all I'll say. If you know Agatha Christie, some of her famous books, this is like pretty much the solution to one book combined with a little twist from another book. Like, these are Agatha Christie solutions. So if you know kind of famous Agatha Christie solutions, the Melissa James murder is that to a T. Hopefully that's not a big clue, but hopefully if you wanted a clue, you'll enjoy it. Hey, join us next week for episode 4. Susan meets with Alan's ex-partner and learns a shocking secret. Talk to you next week.